This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Have you ever fully assembled your box of Armageddon Space Marines only to realize, wow, these really don't look that much like Dark Angels? Me too. So today I'm going to show you every single tip and trick that I used to convert my basic Armageddon Space Marines into the best kind of Space Marines. It's Dark Angels. To begin, let's address the largest elephant in the room, the Vanguard veterans. As well, yes, these beautiful boys do look really cool. They also present a rather sticky conundrum for the lore-interested Dark Angels player. As much like the Blade Guard veterans and Stern Guard veterans before them, they are implied to be part of the first company by their markings. And while for most chapters this isn't going to be a problem, for the Dark Angels specifically, our first legion is the venerable Deathwing, whose main thing is, of course, that they go to battle in that iconic bone white Terminator armor, which even if you're not a Dark Angels player, I'm sure you're familiar with. And while recent lore updates, or retcons if you want to call them that, do allow the Deathwing to go to battle in their various suits of power armor, the lore justification is that these guys do have a suit of Terminator armor, they just aren't wearing it today. It's their day off. And while I think this is totally fine, I painted my Stern Guard veterans in a bone white scheme to represent that they're a part of the Deathwing. I just assume they have their Terminator suits at home. But in this case, instead of painting these up as Deathwing veterans on vacation, I thought it might be more fun to convert them into basic Assault Intercessors with jump packs so they can join the rest of my rank and file Green Wing, and so that my Deathwing can remain mostly Terminators. In order to do this, the main task we're going to need to do is to file down all of the first company markings. I used my Dremel tool to speed things up a bit by sanding down any of the larger iconography, as well as my hobby knife to scrape down any leftover excess. The main thing we're looking to remove here is this thing, the Crux Terminatus. The big one is located on their right-hand shoulder, but some of these guys also have it as a sort of keychain near their waists, or even a mini one on their forehead or on their chest. I also removed any of these laurels that some of these Marines have, as well as these veteran-looking symbols on the wrist guards. I'm not really sure what this one is for specifically, but it looks like something only a veteran would have. And as 3 of the chest plates had the Crux Terminatus, I ended up just filing off all of the chest plates to be completely smooth, as I just thought it looked a little bit cooler. While I was in here doing some carving, I even decided to add a little bit of battle damage in the form of a few scratches on the armor, inspired by the fantastic work of Bene Crafts. And if you haven't seen this guy's stuff before, he's an absolute master at Space Marine conversions. He does lots of Dark Angels stuff as well, so I'm going to leave a little link down in the description to his channel if you want to check him out later. Well, for most of the dremeling, I did use the larger sanding bit. For some of the harder to reach places or more detailed spots, I used this smaller boring bit, which I also realized works just about perfectly on its own, not attached to the Dremel, for drilling out all of your barrels. Always drill out your barrels. Remember to do it. It's important, probably. And for some areas where the drilling and sanding ended up looking a little bit too rough, I applied a coat of Tamiya extra thin cement to help melt down the plastic a little bit to smooth things out. Once all of these changes were made, I was quite happy with the results. However, I did realize that for the Assault Intercessors with jump packs, we weren't allowed to take all of the Marines with power swords. Only the Sergeant is allowed to have a power sword, unlike the Vanguard veterans. So we did have to do a few hand swaps to give these guys chain swords instead of power swords. Except for the Sergeant, he can keep his. But for the 4 others, I clipped off their blades and replaced them with these chain swords left over from the Black Templar Crusader Squad kit that I used to kit bash my original Dark Angels, both the Scouts and Hellblasters, in that very first Dark Angels video, linked down in the description. But before putting the Dremel away, I thought this would be a good opportunity to sand down the surface of the banner on our chapter's new Space Marine Ancients. I did multiple passes on this, first doing some sanding with the Dremel, then applying plastic cement to smooth things back out. Once that was dry, I did some more sanding. I then applied some sprue goo to fill in some gaps, and then even more sanding and scraping until it was about as smooth as I think it's gonna get. And I finished off this banner conversion with a nice little Dark Angel symbol from the current upgrade sprue at the top of the banner pole. And of course, the reason we're doing all this, removing all of the Armageddon specific stuff from this ancient and from the Marines in general, is because we know from the most recent lore book that the Dark Angels are actually not present on Armageddon at this point during this battle. So instead, we're going to paint up this ancient as just a generic ancient of the Dark Angels' third company. Why third company specifically? Well, after much deliberation, I have in fact decided that all of my Green Wing Marines, aside from the Scouts of course, who are part of the 10th company, are going to be a part of the third company, also known as the Unmerciful, which of course makes this figure Captain Gabriel. As yes, of course, the Dark Angels are one of those chapters which are developed enough that they have named captains with their own specific titles for each of the 10 companies. And while sure I could fudge some of this lore, make up my own characters, do whatever I want, in my opinion, part of the fun of playing something like Dark Angels and not a successor chapter of the Dark Angels is being creative within the existing lore and getting all of the little details and names and markings correct. In fact, especially after reading David Ely's fantastic articles on the Dark Angels over on his website, and absolutely drooling over his wonderful photos and explanations of his completed fourth company of the Dark Angels, I now feel extremely inspired to create a completely painted third company of my very own. As between the Armageddon box and the Marines I already have painted for my Dark Angels, we're already over 20% of the way there, and while this definitely won't be something I complete this year, maybe not even next year or the year after, I think painting up 106 more Dark Angels, plus another Dreadnought and a few vehicles, is actually a relatively achievable goal within a few years. Of course, I do want to paint some Deathwing and some Ravenwing as well, but I think my focus for the next few years is I really want to complete the third company, as it would be so cool to have a full company of Space Marines. And if you're interested in following along with this project and seeing all of the updates, one of the best things you can do, aside from subscribing so you can follow along with the video updates, is go and check out my website, where I have been posting updates to as many of my armies as I've had the time to photograph and document. And while I know for some of you making a website might seem a little bit overwhelming, I assure you that putting together this website and keeping it updated has been extremely easy to do, even for someone like myself who's really bad at computer and technical stuff, thanks to this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website and hosting platform for all of your website needs, and it's extremely easy to use. Just pick from one of their fabulously designed starter templates or build your own template from scratch, and then customize things to your heart's content using their extremely intuitive drag and drop fluid engine. No coding or technical knowledge required. As I said before, I've been using my current Squarespace site to host a gallery of my painted miniatures, all of my hobby reference documents, as well as an online store, which has been super easy to set up, keep updated, and accepts a variety of payment options, all built in and ready for you to use. So if you need a website, why not check out squarespace.com today for a 14-day free trial. And then when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Dana Howl for 10% off your very first purchase of a website or domain. And now back to our video. The largest decision maker for me in picking the third company as my main focus was that I really like the name Gabriel as the master of the third company. I just think it's cute and angel themed. So I wanted to give this model a little bit of extra attention, as he will be sort of our main character going forward, at least as far as the third company is concerned. So as you can see, I've already given him a simple head swap, subbing in the spare winged helmet from the Azrael kit for the standard head sculpt. And after this, I wanted to make his relic shield a little bit more Dark Angels coded. So at first, I tried filing down the skull to make room for a Dark Angel symbol, but it wasn't really working for me. It was just looking a little bit too busy, I think. So instead, I tried using this Stormcast shield left over from the Stormcast Reclusian models that we used for kit bashing our Inner Circle companions in our last Dark Angels video. And for this one, I just carefully filed down all of the Stormcast iconography, just leaving a simple circle in the middle of the shield, over top of which I glued this sculpted on Dark Angel symbol, which is from the current Dark Angels upgrade sprue. And while I do like this new shield a lot better than the previous one, I felt like the arm pose holding the shield didn't work with the new shield, so we're gonna need a new arm. So selecting a brand new left arm from my Dark Angels bits box. This one is once again from the Black Templar Crusader Squad kit, which is great for Dark Angels kit bashing, as well as this Dark Angels shoulder pad that I think is from the Inner Circle Companions kit, and then started testing out the poses this arm might have with the shield. After quite a bit of fussing around with it, I eventually landed on this sort of casual leaning pose where maybe he's taking a bit of a breather after some action and surveying the battlefield, as a commander is wont to do. But as much as I liked this new pose, I now found that the right arm's pose didn't match the new left arm. So I clipped off this other arm as well, and then using yet another spare arm from the Crusader Squad kit, I glued the wrist and sword from the original sculpt to the Crusader Squad arm, and then glued the entire assembly on to create a nice relaxed looking pose, which I think is extremely fitting for the master of the arsenal. We'll return back to Gabriel later on to add even more customization, but while he was drying, I decided to add some fun kit bashing to one of the few models in this big box that's not going to be a part of the third company, and that is, of course, the Land Speeder, which will be a part of the iconic second company, the Ravenwing. When I think of the Ravenwing, the first thing I think of is this little tail fin bit that gets added on to the back of the bikes usually. But after doing some research, it turns out that this is mostly a bike-only thing, and it's usually not added on to the Ravenwing speeders. And I totally see why, as it doesn't quite look right on the back of this speeder. It's too small or something. So I set this specific part aside for my eventual Ravenwing bike detachment, and instead I added some other iconic parts onto the speeder that I did see a lot in the art and the existing models in the books, such as this massive tome, once again from the current upgrade sprue, as well as carving off this Aquila to replace it with the standard Dark Angels logo, also from the current upgrade sprue. Next, I wanted to use these Ravenwing symbols once again from that same upgrade sprue to add onto the sides of the speeder. And while in most examples, I'm seeing it usually goes about here, on this one specifically, there's not really enough room, I think, to place it. So I ended up placing it here instead, as I thought it just looked better and filled up that space a bit more nicely. After adding one of these on each side, I quickly realized there was also some gap filling that needed doing on this model. So I used some sprue goo to weld the gap shut, and then went over this globby mess with some Tamiya extra thin cement to help smooth it all out. Once this had fully dried, I would later file down the excess even more to get some sharper angles on the vehicle, and I finished things off with a few more battle damage type scratches on the vehicle. Finally, with all of the more obvious conversion bits added to a lot of the models, it was time for the more difficult part of this conversion process, and yes, I am talking about the sculpting. Now, I admit this part is fully optional. You could instead just do some head swaps, adding in some hooded heads if you have some left over from an upgrade sprue or from some of your Dark Angels specific models. But personally, I already used up all of my spare hooded heads on my previous conversion projects, and I really didn't want to buy another $40 upgrade kit just for a handful of hooded heads. I mean, I'm sure I'll use the other parts later, but the principle remains. So I decided to try something I've never done before and tried sculpting some of these hoods and robes on myself using green stuff. And while this did take a little bit of practice before I started seeing results I was happy with, it really wasn't as difficult as I was expecting it to be. And from now on, I think I'm mostly just going to sculpt all of the robes and hoods on myself for my Dark Angels. Of course, I didn't do this with every Dark Angel in this detachment, as personally I don't think every Marine needs a hood and a tabard to register as a Dark Angel, and instead I tried to reserve the hoods and robes as a sort of status symbol for the more senior officers in the company. So I started out by sculpting on simple hoods for the various unit leaders, rolling out flat pancakes of putty, cutting these in half with my hobby knife, placing them over top of the characters' heads, and then trying to sort of tuck in the edges into the armor using my sculpting tool. Once these edges were fully attached, I would then use my rounded sculpting tool on the inside of the hood to sort of tease out the edges so that the cloth would drape down around the head with some negative space inside in the way that you might expect this cloth to naturally hang around things. I would also use this same tool to add texture to the outside of the hoods to look more cloth-like, adding folds where I thought it might naturally flow, and occasionally using the tip of my silicone tool, lubricated with just a little bit of water to smooth things out. For the Raven Wing pilot, I even took this a step further, adding motion to the hood by making it blow backwards in the breeze to give the whole vehicle a sense of movement. And after my first few tries of experimenting with these techniques to get robes and hoods, I eventually stumbled upon an even more easy and effective way of sculpting cloth just by trial and error. And that was to basically wait until the green stuff had dried for about 90 minutes to 2 hours, and then I just stretched out the pieces of epoxy as far as they would go until they would sort of tear into 2 pieces like this. I would then use these strips to create more naturally thin looking hoods and robes that even appear to have a bit of cloth texture to them in some places, as because of the tearing of the 2 pieces, something about the way the clay behaves when you tear it like this creates pieces that are very thin in the center with thicker rims around the edges that I felt worked really well for the look of cloth. And while in some places I used my knife to cut more regular edges for tabards and things like that, in some places I chose to just keep the ripped looking texture towards the edge of the cloth in some places where I thought it looked natural or interesting, such as on the company's head wizard, librarian, where I found myself gluing on some antlers from an old Bretonnian knight helmet and then layering on these super thin strips of cloth to give the impression of a tattered hood blowing backwards from a magical breeze or something. Or on the captain himself, where you can see I'm tearing wider strips and attaching them to create some robes over top of his armor. The nice thing about using this sculpting method is that you not only get an extremely thin piece of clay, but it also makes the clay extremely light, so you can more easily create the illusion of cloth that is flowing in the wind as it's less likely to fall down. And finally, once I had added some sculpted detail to all of the models I wanted to add sculpted detail to, it was finally time to get these models based and painted. For the basing, I used the same techniques that I've used on all of my previous Dark Angels. This is the woodland basing scheme that I outlined in my basing secrets video from earlier this year. I put a link down in the description if you want all of the details. And as for the painting, I apologize, I haven't gotten the chance to fully paint all of these yet and make a full painting guide for the Armageddon Dark Angels, but I will make that video or possibly multiple videos eventually, and until then, I'm probably going to be mostly using the same techniques that I've used in my previous Dark Angels painting videos on these new Marines. So once again, I've put a full playlist to all of my Dark Angels videos down in the description, which includes a guide on painting the Green Wing, the Death Wing, Camo Scouts, Inner Circle Companions, pretty much anything you would need for Dark Angels, so feel free to check those out if you want some ideas for how to paint your Dark Angels. So with that, thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. I hope you got some good tips for converting all of your new Armageddon guys into Dark Angels. If you have any questions about the specifics of anything I'm using here or the way I did things, feel free to leave them down in the comments. I try to answer as many of those as I can. Thank you to all of our wonderful patrons for your ongoing support. And with that, I will see all of you in the next video.